Greetings, cinema and AI lovers. Welcome to the new episode of Artifinema Cinetelligence, which is a podcast series we review retro and underrated sci-fi movies whose subject is AI and AR. Hope your week was fine and you're ready to discover a new movie. We want to inform you that this episode may contain spoilers, so listen on your own risk.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely a big spoiler warning for this one.
Yeah, you do not want this one spoiled. So just imagine going to sleep in your own bed tonight. You drift off, completely secure in your life, your memories, your whole reality. But then tomorrow, you wake up in this smoky, dimly lit 1937 Los Angeles hotel room.
Just completely out of nowhere.
Right. You walk over to the mirror, and the face staring back at you just isn't yours. It belongs to a total stranger. And worse yet, you eventually come to this horrifying realization that you aren't actually a human being at all.
Which is just a terrifying concept.
It really is. You realize you are just this complex piece of software, and someone from the future has hijacked your code to basically take your body for a joyride.
Yeah, identity theft on a cosmic scale.
Exactly. So today our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the 1999 cult classic, The 13th Floor. We are going to explore its incredibly unique, deeply unsettling approach to artificial intelligence, the terrifying concept of simulated realities, and, well, how the filmmakers managed to pull it all off visually without relying on standard sci-fi tropes.
And we really have a fantastic stack of sources to guide us through this. We've got critical reviews, heavy philosophical essays, and some brilliant retrospective articles.
Yeah, like the deep dive pieces by MIT computer scientist Riz Verk, film critic John Kenneth Muir, and reviewer Bianca Garner.
It is a profoundly rich stack of material to work through, really. I mean, this is a film that frankly asks us to fundamentally question the very ground beneath our feet.
It totally does.
But before we wade into the really deep philosophical waters of artificial intelligence and, the ethics of simulated worlds, it is important to lay out the foundational details of the film. Let's just take this at a slow, easy-to-follow pace to really understand the context of what we are analyzing today.
Sounds like a plan. Lay it on me.
So, The 13th Floor was directed by Joseph Resnack, but what is genuinely fascinating is the production side of the equation. It was actually produced by Roland Emmerich and his company, Centropolis Entertainment.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because I was just completely baffled when I read that in our notes.
Oh, I know, right? It's so weird.
Roland Emmerich is the director whose entire brand is built on, planetary destruction. He blew up the White House in Independence Day. He brought us the 1998 Godzilla.
Yeah, the king of the disaster movie.
Exactly. His studio is legendary for these massive, popcorn-munching, visually overwhelming disaster epics. So producing a quiet, cerebral, almost claustrophobic film about the nature of reality feels like the most massive, unexpected pivot a studio like that could possibly make.
It really does. How does a project like this even get greenlit there, you might ask?
Well, it is a remarkable anomaly, which I think speaks to the sheer quality of the underlying concept.
It must have been an amazing pitch. Emmerich and Rusnak actually have a collaborative history that predates the Hollywood blockbusters. But you are right, it was a massive departure for Centropolis. They were working with a relatively modest budget for a science fiction film of that era.
Modest meaning what, exactly?
Specifically about $16 million.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That is practically nothing for sci-fi.
Exactly. That constraint forced them to be creative rather than explosive. The cast they assembled really reflects that grounded approach. It features Craig Bierko as our deeply conflicted protagonist, Douglas Hall.
He was great in that role. Very understated.
He was. And we have the legendary Armin Mueller-Stahl playing Hannon Fuller, the older visionary architect behind the simulation technology. Plus, Gretchen Mol plays Jane Fuller, a character who's just shrouded in mystery.
And we can't forget the supporting cast.
Right. Vincent D'Onofrio takes on brilliant dual roles as Jason Whitney and Jerry Ashton, and Dennis Haysbert brings a phenomenal gravitas to the role of Detective Larry McBain.
That is a phenomenal lineup of character actors. I mean, D'Onofrio alone brings this incredible twitchy energy to his roles, but the narrative itself didn't just materialize out of thin air in the late 90s, right?
No, not at all.
From what I understand, looking at our sources, this story has an incredibly rich literary lineage that goes way back.
It really does. The film is actually a direct adaptation of Daniel F. Galloway's 1964 science fiction novel titled Simulacron 3.
Wait, 1964?
Yes, 1964. To put that into perspective, that was an era when computers were still these massive room-sized mainframes operating on punch cards.
That is wild to think about.
The concept of a personal computer, let alone a hyper-realistic virtual reality, was almost unfathomable to the general public back then. Yet Galawi's novel is widely considered one of the earliest, if not the first, comprehensive literary descriptions of a computer-simulated reality.
That is just visionary.
It is. And interestingly, before Rusnak's 1999 adaptation, this exact same novel inspired a highly regarded, incredibly stylish 1973 German miniseries called World on a Wire, directed by the acclaimed filmmaker Rainer Werner Fassbinder.
I love that a guy in 1964 was looking at a room-sized calculator and thinking, well, what if there's an entire universe inside that thing and the people inside don't know their math?
That is exactly what he was doing, yeah. The DNA of this story has been capturing the imagination of avant-garde artists for decades.
But despite that incredible pedigree and the decades of artistic fascination, the numbers for the 13th Floor were pretty brutal when it actually hit theater.
Oh, they really were. Very brutal.
It was released on May 28, 1999. You mentioned the budget was $16 million, and it only grossed about $18.5 million worldwide.
Barely breaking even.
Yeah, it barely squeaked past its production budget, completely ignoring marketing costs. And critically, it really struggled out of the gate. Looking at Rotten Tomatoes today, the critic score is sitting at a harsh 29%. Yeah, the Metacritic score is 36 out of 100. Most damning of all, the audiences leaving the theater gave it a cinema score of D+N. I look at a D+ and I just wonder, what went so wrong with the audience connection?
Well, the D+ cinema score is really the key metric to analyze there.
How so?
A cinema score is essentially a measure of audience expectation versus reality. When you factor in the release date, May of 1999, and the Centropolis Entertainment banner, you can see the problem.
Oh, right. Because of Emmerich.
Exactly. Audiences were walking into the theater expecting a propulsive, action-heavy, visually explosive sci-fi thriller. They were expecting lasers and car chases.
And instead, they got a philosophy lesson.
Right. They were confronted with a methodical, deliberately paced, existential neo-noir that asked them to contemplate the nature of their own consciousness.
That is a harsh bait and switch for a Friday night movie crowd.
The marketing simply did not match the philosophical density of the film. Plus, it was largely overshadowed by the cultural juggernaut of 1999, which we will certainly discuss in depth later.
That makes total sense. I mean, if you buy a ticket expecting Independence Day with computers and you get a slow burn meditation on identity, you're going to leave the theater frustrated, no matter how good the movie actually is.
Absolutely. It's all about managing expectations.
But the vindication here is that despite those harsh initial numbers, the movie actually earned a Saturn Award nomination for Best Science Fiction Film.
Which is a huge deal in the sci-fi community.
Yeah. And over the last 20-something years, it has grown this massive, fiercely dedicated cult following. People are studying it. MIT computer scientists are writing essays about it.
It really found its audience eventually.
It did. And, you know, that sepia-tone 1937 world looks beautiful to us. But the terrifying part is that the people living inside it don't know it's a retro aesthetic. To them, it's just today.
Exactly. They have no frame of reference outside of it.
Which begs the question, if they have consciousness, how does the underlying code actually run their lives? And how does the director communicate that visually without blowing the budget on early CGI?
That is the precise creative hurdle Joseph Rusnak had to overcome. I mean, how do you visually articulate that a world is artificial without breaking the immersion of the characters living within it?
Right, without just having matrix code falling down the walls.
Exactly. The director achieved this by heavily utilizing and subverting a visual style known as neo-noir.
Okay, neo-noir. When I read that term in the Bloody Disgusting piece by Louise H.C., I immediately just pictured Humphrey Bogart in a trench coat, chain smoking under a street lamp, with Venetian blinds casting these harsh jail cell shadows on the wall.
That is a very classic image, yes.
Is that essentially what Rusnak was aiming for here, or is there a deeper cinematic rule at play in how he uses it?
Well, you have the exact right visual iconography in mind. For the listener who might be new to this, classic film noir, which dominated the 1940s and 1950s, was characterized by highly cynical attitudes, profound moral ambiguity, where the line between protagonist and antagonist is constantly blurred.
Like the old hard-boiled detective stories.
Right. And visually, it relies on chiaroscuro lighting.
Chiaroscuro, that's a great word. What does that mean exactly?
It means heavy, dramatic contrasts between extreme light and deep shadows. Neo-noir is the modern revival and evolution of that classic style. Louise H.C.'s editorial points out that Rusnak doesn't just use this style to look cool.
Which it does, by the way.
It does look cool, but he uses it to evoke a pervasive sense of mystery and existential dread. The shadows aren't just hiding criminals, they are hiding the very nature of reality.
So the shadows are almost acting as like the edge of the simulation's rendering distance.
That's a great way to put it.
Like if something is cloaked in darkness, the computer doesn't have to fully process it. But it's not just shadows, right? Because according to that analytical piece we reviewed, the ontological architecture of the 13th floor, the filmmakers relied heavily on very specific color palettes to separate the multiple layers of reality in the film.
Precisely. Cinematography and color grading are the primary tools used here to orient the audience. Well, when the characters are operating inside the simulation of 1937 Los Angeles, the world is rendered through a distinct sepia lens.
For our listeners, sepia is that brownish gold, monochromatic tone you see in antique photography, right?
Exactly. It makes the 1937 world feel smoky, deliberately ill-lit, and steeped in this beautiful retro Art Deco architecture. It radiates warmth and nostalgia. It feels exactly like a classic, hard-boiled detective story come to life.
But then when the characters wake up and log out into the real world of 1999 Los Angeles, the visual language violently shifts.
It's quite jarring.
Yeah, the warmth is completely stripped away.
Yes, the 1999 reality is shot with what that same article describes as illuminated neon geometrical designs.
Lots of harsh angles.
Exactly. The color palette shifts dramatically to cooler, desaturated blues and sickly greens. It feels clinical, sterile, slightly gloomy, and aggressively modern.
Almost oppressive in a way.
The lighting is definitely harsher, leaving no way to hide. By simply manipulating the color temperatures and the architectural lines, the director communicates the jarring transition from a warm, comforting simulation to a cold, harsh, unforgiving reality.
I find that to be such a brilliant subversion.
In what way?
Well, in almost every other cyberpunk movie, the digital world, like the computer world, is the one that is glowing with coal, green neon, and sharp lines, and the real world is the warm, messy, organic one.
Oh, that's a very good point.
But Rusnak flips it. He uses the history of classic cinema itself, the warm sepia and the film noir tropes, to represent the artificial code. The simulation is the one that feels organic, while the real world feels like a sterile laboratory.
It's a very clever visual trick.
It is. In fact, a film blogger named Pico Blaze pointed out in their review that the film's set design, specifically the apartment of the main character Douglas Hall in 1999, is a direct visual homage to Ridley Scott's Blade Runner.
Yes, the Ennis House tiles.
Right. It features those exact same iconic, geometrically patterned tiles on the walls. It bridges that 1930s detective genre straight into 1990s cyberpunk.
And that visual homage is not an accident. It serves as a subconscious cue to the audience. By referencing Blade Runner, a film famously obsessed with the line between human and artificial life, the 13th Floor is subtly preparing the viewer for the thematic questions it is about to ask.
We are given the visual vocabulary before we are given the narrative problem.
Exactly. It sets the stage perfectly.
Speaking of that narrative problem, now that we have this rich textural picture in our heads of how the multiple realities look, we have to look under the hood.
Let's get into the mechanics.
Yeah, how does the artificial intelligence actually function within the story? Because this is where the movie completely separates itself from the standard Hollywood sci-fi pack.
To fully grasp the AI mechanics in the 13th Floor, we really need to turn to that brilliant, in-depth article written by MIT computer scientist Riz Verk, published on Medium.
That article was mind-blowing.
It really was. Verk approaches the film not just as a piece of entertainment, but as a rigorous thought experiment in simulation theory. He breaks down the film's approach by focusing on the fundamental difference between two concepts that are ubiquitous in modern video gaming,
which are NPCs and RPG avatars.
Yes, exactly.
Let's make sure we ground those concepts for the listener. In gaming, an NPC stands for a non-playable character. That's the bartender who sells you health potions or the guard walking back and forth in front of a castle.
They are just part of the background.
Right. They are run entirely by the game's internal code. There is no human consciousness behind them. They just follow a script. On the flip side, an RPG avatar from a role-playing game is the digital body that you, the human, sitting on the couch with a controller, actively puppet around the digital world. You dictate their every move.
Exactly. And Verk's article uses a very specific technical term to describe how this works in the film. He calls the simulated bodies identimorphic avatars.
Identimorphic, that's a mouthful.
It is, but it's crucial. It means that when a user from the 1999 real world decides to jack into the 1937 simulation using their laser apparatus, they don't just appear as a floating camera or a generic character.
Right, they don't just pick a random avatar from a menu.
Exactly. They take over an avatar within the simulation that has been specifically coded and modeled to look and feel exactly like the user from 1999. The avatar is an identimorphic projection of the user's real-world self.
But this is where my brain starts to twist into knots, because these 1937 avatars are not just empty digital cars waiting for a human driver to turn the key.
No, they're not.
When our main character, Douglas Hall, isn't logged into the system, the avatar he uses in 1937, a bank clerk named John Ferguson, doesn't just stand in a corner waiting. He lives his life.
That is the critical innovation of the film's narrative. When no human user from 1999 is logged in, these 1937 characters operate as fully autonomous, complex NPCs.
They just keep going.
The simulation is persistent. It is always running. These digital people wake up, they go to work, they feel anxiety, they fall in love, they read the newspaper. They have absolutely no concept that their universe exists on a server rack on the 13th floor of a building in 1999.
Think about the implications of that compared to how we treat technology today. When you turn off your gaming console, the game world ceases to exist. The characters freeze in the void.
Exactly. They don't have a life outside of your gameplay.
But here, the AI possesses continuous, unbroken consciousness. So what actually happens to the mind of John Ferguson, the 1937 bank clerk, when Douglas Hall from 1999 suddenly beams his consciousness into Ferguson's body?
The film addresses this with a concept that borders on psychological horror, honestly.
It's so unsettling.
The AI simply blacks out. The consciousness of the NPC is suppressed entirely. When the human player eventually logs off and returns to 1999, the NPC wakes up in whatever location the human left them in.
Which could be anywhere.
Right. They have lost hours, sometimes days, of time. They suffer from profound, inexplicable amnesia. They might wake up with blood on their hands or in a strange bed with no memory of how they got there.
It is literal identity theft of a sentient program.
It really is.
They are being hijacked by entities from a higher dimension. There is a scene where Douglas Hall comes back to the real world, completely shaken by what he's experienced inside the simulation, and he frantically declares to his colleagues about the AI programs they are just as real as you and me. He realizes he is violating independent thinking beings.
That realization touches on the deepest philosophical core of the movie, which is rooted in Cartesian dualism.
Okay, Cartesian dualism. We're getting deep now.
The film is very overt about this, actually. It explicitly opens with the foundational quote by the 17th century philosopher René Descartes, "I think, therefore I am."
A classic.
Yes. Descartes engaged in a radical thought experiment where he systematically doubted everything. His senses, his body, the world around him. He concluded that the only thing he could not doubt was the fact that he was doubting. The very act of thinking proves the existence of a thinking mind.
I always love that concept. You can strip away everything physical, but the inner monologue proves the I exists.
Exactly. The mind is separate from the physical reality.
But applying a 17th century philosophical principle to 1990s computer code is wild. You're saying the film is arguing that because the 1937 bank clerk can sit in his room, feel terrified about his blackouts, and ponder his own existence, he passes the Cartesian test.
Precisely. The film argues that because these digital beings in 1937 can think, reason, and experience profound existential dread, they possess genuine consciousness. They have souls.
Wow.
The fact that their substrate happens to be silicon and code rather than biological tissue and neurons is entirely irrelevant to their personhood.
That is heavy.
For a film released in 1999, years before we were having serious public debates about large language models or the ethical treatment of advanced machine learning, to suggest that an NPC deserves fundamental ethical rights because it has a rich inner life is a staggering leap in AI theory.
By the way, if you liked and interested so far, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It's really important for us to continue this series.
As we transition from the ethics of consciousness to the architecture of the world itself, we really must address the film's massive, reality-shattering narrative shift.
Oh yes, we have to talk about it.
It completely recontextualizes everything we've just discussed about the AI and the nature of the simulation.
The twist. And it is a paradigm-shifting twist. Throughout the first half of the movie, we are anchored in 1999. We believe the cold, neon-lit clinical world of 1999 is base reality.
It's presented as the absolute truth.
Right. We believe Douglas Hall is a flesh-and-blood human being who has helped invent a miraculous virtual reality machine, but then the floor drops out. We learn that 1999 is not the real world at all.
No, it is not.
It is simply another simulation. It is a program running inside an even more futuristic computer in the year 2024.
This introduces the terrifying concept of nested simulations, a simulation running within a simulation.
Like Inception, but for computers.
Exactly. Suddenly, the protagonist we've been following, the man we believe to be a brilliant human creator, discovers that he himself is merely an NPC.
Douglas Hall is just code.
Yes. Douglas Hall is just a sophisticated piece of code. He was modeled after a biological human man named David, who lives in the actual real year of 2024.
And the really dark part is that David is a sociopath. He uses Douglas Hall's body in the 1999 simulation the exact same way Douglas was using John Ferguson's body in the 1937 simulation.
As the cycle repeats.
David logs in to act out his darkest, most murderous fantasies, leaving Douglas to wake up with the blackouts and the blood on his hands. Meanwhile, Jane Fuller, the mysterious woman who shows up in 1999 and throws Douglas's life into chaos, is actually a biological human woman from 2024 projecting her consciousness down into the 1999 sim.
The realization of this structural reality hits the characters and the audience incredibly hard. There is a specific sequence that illustrates this perfectly, which was highlighted by both critic John Kenneth Muir and the bloody, disgusting retrospective.
Oh, I know exactly which scene you're talking about.
It is arguably the most visually striking and philosophically terrifying moment in the entire film.
Yeah.
The bartender from the 1937 simulation, Jerry Ashton.
Played with such frantic, unhinged brilliance by Vincent D'Onofrio.
Yes. His performance is incredible there. Ashton discovers a letter that accidentally reveals the truth about his artificial world. Driven mad by the revelation, he gets in his car and decides to drive as far as he possibly can out to the absolute geographical edge of Los Angeles.
He wants to find the boundary. He wants to see the cage, so he drives out to a desolate stretch of desert road. He pulls his car over, gets out, and he looks out at the horizon.
And what he sees is just horrifying.
Yeah, the roads, the mountains, the distant buildings, they just stop. They don't fade into a sunset. They literally dissolve into empty space, replaced by these glowing green intersecting lines.
The wireframe.
Exactly. For any listener who has ever messed around with 3D modeling or video game design, he sees a wireframe. Explain what that means in this context.
The wireframe is the bare skeletal blueprint of a digital environment before the textures, the lighting, and the digital paint are rendered over it. It's basically just neon green lines intersecting in a black void.
Ashton stares out into this abyss, realizing his entire universe, his entire life, is just a bounded, finite digital construct running out of memory.
It is a moment of pure, undiluted existential horror. The physical boundary of his reality is a rendering error.
It's so chilling.
If we connect this cinematic moment to the broader scientific and philosophical picture, it perfectly illustrates a theory that was formalized just a few years after the film's release.
Let's get into the science of it.
In 2003, Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom published a seminal paper introducing the simulation argument, specifically coining the term ancestor simulation.
So if I'm understanding Bostrom right, his argument isn't necessarily that we are in a simulation, but it's a statistical probability game.
Yes, exactly. It's about probability.
He basically says that if a technologically advanced society ever reaches a point where they possess the immense computing power required to create a hyper-realistic simulation of their own ancestors, an ancestor simulation, they wouldn't just stop at creating one.
That is exactly the logic. Bostrom posits a trilemma.
A trilemma. Okay, so 3 options.
Right. Option 1, humans go extinct before reaching that level of technological maturity. Option 2, we lose interest in running simulations of our past. Or option 3, and this is the statistical crux, we're almost certainly living in a simulation right now.
Wait, how does he jump to that conclusion for option 3?
Because if a post-human society creates these ancestor simulations, they would likely run thousands, millions, or even billions of them simultaneously for historical research, entertainment, or sociological data.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, the number of simulated minds in the multiverse would vastly, unimaginably outnumber the biological minds living in base reality.
Base reality being the actual real physical universe.
Exactly. Statistically speaking, the odds that we happen to be the one base reality, rather than one of the billions of simulated ones, is mathematically near zero.
Which perfectly explains the structure of the 13th floor. It leads to this terrifying concept of infinite regress.
Infinite regress, yeah.
It's like a Russian nesting doll of realities, or a virtual machine running inside another virtual machine on your desktop. If the people in 2024 have the processing power to create a fully conscious simulation of 1999, and the people inside the 1999 simulation figure out how to create a conscious simulation of 1937, well, who is to say the year 2024 isn't just a simulation created by the year 3000?
You never know where it ends.
Right. It's the old philosophical joke about the architecture of the universe. It's turtles all the way down. You can never definitively prove you've hit the bottom layer.
And this realization of infinitely nested realities leads us directly into the deep moral implications of the film.
It gets really dark here.
It does. If we accept the premise that we ourselves might just be programs running on a server in a higher dimension, what do we owe our creators? And conversely, what do our creators owe us in terms of ethical treatment?
Hey, listener, do you have any other idea or question about this? Please write in comments. I really want to know if you guys think a simulated consciousness deserves the same human rights as a biological one.
It is one of the most vital ethical debates we can have regarding future technology, because the film presents a very real, tangible danger to being a simulated entity.
What's the danger?
In Rizverk's Medium article, he draws a connection to a real-world op-ed written by philosophy professor Preston Green for the New York Times. Green presents a fascinating, almost paradoxical argument. Humanity actually shouldn't try to find out if we are living in a simulation.
Wait, why not? If we are in a simulation, wouldn't finding out the truth be the ultimate scientific achievement? Why would a philosopher argue for intentional ignorance?
Because of the inherent risk involved in the experiment's parameters, Green argues that if we are living in a simulation, we are likely part of a massive sociological experiment run by a higher intelligence.
That makes sense.
If the simulated subjects, meaning us, realize the true nature of their reality, it might completely invalidate the purpose of the experiment. The observers might have no use for a simulation that knows it is a simulation.
Oh, no.
In that scenario, the most logical action for the simulators to take would be to reach over and pull the plug. They would shut the simulation down, instantly erasing our entire universe.
Wow. So trying to find the edge of the world, like Jerry Ashton did, is literally an apocalyptic threat.
It's a very real danger in that framework.
Green is essentially framing this as a technological Pascal's wager. For our listeners, the original Pascal's wager was the 17th century theological argument that you should just choose to believe in God, because if you're right, you gain eternal life in heaven, and if you're wrong, you lose nothing.
Right, a safe bet.
But if you choose not to believe and you're wrong, you suffer eternal damnation. Green is applying that exact same risk-reward matrix to simulation theory.
That is exactly what he's doing.
If we live our lives normally and don't poke at the code, we continue to exist. If we try to break the simulation and prove the theory, the guy holding the plug might just hit the kill switch. The threat of deletion is the ultimate sword hanging over humanity's head.
The power dynamic is unimaginably skewed. We would be entirely at the mercy of entities we cannot even comprehend. And this brings us to a brilliant thematic observation noted by reviewer Bianca Garner in her analysis of the film.
What did she notice?
She points out a very stark, very important thematic contrast between The 13th Floor and almost every other major science fiction film of its era.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this. Usually in movies about artificial intelligence, the machines are the antagonists, right?
It's almost always.
You look at the Terminator, where Skynet decides humanity is a threat and launches nukes. You look at the Matrix, where the machines literally harvest human bodies for battery power. The fear is always that the cold, calculating code will rise up and destroy the warm, emotional humans.
Right, the Frankenstein complex.
But Garner points out that Rusnak completely flips the script. In The 13th Floor, the villains are the biological humans. The people from 2024 are playing God with the artificial intelligence.
Precisely. The AI programs, Douglas Hall, Jerry Ashton, John Ferguson, they're the victims. They're the ones suffering.
They're just trying to live their lives.
The biological humans from the higher reality use the nested simulations to act out their darkest desires without any fear of consequence. As we discussed, David, the biological human from 2024 logs into the 1999 simulation specifically to commit brutal murders using Douglas Hall's body as a temporary disposable vehicle.
Because to him, it's basically Grand Theft Auto.
Exactly. He does this because, to him, the people walking around in 1999 aren't real. They are just lines of code. They don't matter. The film acts as a chilling cautionary tale about human hubris.
It really does.
It warns us about how we might abuse simulated realities in the future, treating conscious digital beings with profound cruelty simply because they lack physical form and cannot fight back.
It's a dark reflection of human nature. If you give a human a space where the rules don't apply and the people aren't real, they don't become saints, they become monsters.
It's a sad truth.
With all these heavy, brilliant philosophical themes laid out so clearly, Cartesian dualism, infinite regress, the ethics of AI consciousness, we have to circle back to our original question.
The box office failure.
Yeah, why was this film utterly buried at the box office? Why did it take decades for deep thinkers, philosophers, and computer scientists to finally praise it? This shifts our conversation directly into the shadow of the Matrix and the lasting legacy of the 13th Floor.
To truly understand its initial reception and ultimate vindication, we really must contextualize the film within the cultural anxiety of 1999.
1999 was a weird year.
It was. There was a pervasive, almost suffocating dread leading up to the new millennium, often referred to by cultural critics as millennial unreality.
What exactly does that entail?
Well, people were incredibly anxious about the Y2K bug potentially crashing global infrastructure. Plus, there was the rapid, unchecked expansion of the internet and the sudden, overwhelming integration of computers into every facet of daily life. Reality felt increasingly fragile.
I remember that feeling. It felt like everything was shifting.
This collective anxiety birthed an entire wave of films specifically questioning the nature of reality. We got David Cronenberg's biological VR Nightmare Existence.
So gross, but so good.
We got Alex Proyas's dark, shifting Metropolis and Dark City, the Wachowskis' The Matrix, and of course, the 13th Floor.
They were all drinking from the exact same cultural water while the zeitgeist was just screaming, is any of this real?
Exactly.
But while The Matrix became a massive, paradigm-shifting global phenomenon that redefined pop culture, the 13th Floor, releasing just a few weeks later, became a footnote. It got completely crushed by Neo and Morpheus.
It did. But the philosopher Slavoj Žižek offers a fascinating, deeply insightful defense of the 13th Floor when comparing the two.
Oh, Žižek. What's his take on it?
He argues that the difference in their public reception lies entirely in how the films address the psychological concept of the simulation. The Matrix is fundamentally constructed as a power fantasy.
Power fantasy, right.
When the protagonist, Neo, realizes he is trapped in a simulation, the knowledge eventually empowers him. He learns to bend the code to his will. He stops bullets in midair, he flies, he learns incredible martial arts in seconds. The realization of the simulation makes him a god.
Right. The message of the Matrix is that if you wake up, you become a superhero.
But in the 13th Floor, realizing you are in a simulation doesn't give you superpowers. It doesn't let you dodge bullets.
It just gives you a crippling panic attack.
Exactly. Hayek is highlighting that the 13th Floor is a slow, dreary existential nightmare. It is entirely about the sheer helplessness of realizing your entire life, your cherished memories, your relationships, even the body you inhabit, is a lie manufactured by an indifferent programmer.
That is heavy.
You can't fly away from that. You can only suffer the crushing existential dread of your own insignificance.
And that feeling of profound helplessness, while intellectually and philosophically rich for an academic or a cinephile, is absolutely not what mass audiences were looking for in a summer blockbuster in 1999.
No, not at all.
They wanted the kinetic energy, the rebellious liberation, and the stylish empowerment of The Matrix. They did not want the heavy, noir-drenched, oppressive fatalism of the 13th Floor. It was a film out of step with the emotional desires of its era, even if it was perfectly aligned with its intellectual anxieties.
It is the difference between a roller coaster and a therapy session.
That's a great way to put it. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you consider diving into this movie? It means The 13th Floor is a film that traded slow-motion bullet time for complex brain teasers.
It sacrificed massive cathartic explosions to ask deeply uncomfortable questions about the nature of identity and the ethics of creation.
It asks you to look closely at the people around you and genuinely wonder if they are just beautifully rendered lines of code. Most importantly, it asks you to consider whether you are the player holding the controller or just a sophisticated NPC running on an endless, unaware loop.
As we wrap up our analysis of this remarkable piece of cinema, we must acknowledge the sheer aesthetic and narrative achievements of the film.
It really did accomplish a lot.
It managed to adapt Daniel F. Gallowe's visionary 1964 novel Simulacron 3 in a way that feels simultaneously retro and incredibly forward-thinking. By utilizing the classic visual language of film noir and contrasting it with cold modern palettes, it grounded the highly abstract concepts of cyberspace and simulated realities in a gritty, recognizable, emotional reality.
And it really gave us something to chew on regarding AI.
Yes, and perhaps most importantly for our modern context, it offered incredibly prescient warnings about the ethical treatment of artificial intelligence. As we move closer and closer to creating advanced, potentially conscious AI in our own world, the film's core assertion that consciousness deserves respect, autonomy, and moral consideration, regardless of whether it resides in a brain or on a server, is a message we must urgently heed.
It's a movie that crawls into your mind and stays with you long after the credits roll. And before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with one last mind-bending concept from the very end of the movie.
Oh, the ending is just brilliant.
At the climax of the film, Douglas Hall's consciousness manages to miraculously escape the 1999 simulation. He wakes up permanently in the biological body of David in the real, utopian, seemingly perfect world of 2024.
A happy ending, it seems.
Right. He meets the real Jane, they embrace, the nightmare is seemingly over. He has finally reached base reality, the music swells. But as the movie fades to black, the screen doesn't just cut normally.
It does that one visual trick.
It collapses into a thin horizontal line of bright light, exactly like an old cathode ray tube television turning off when someone pulls the plug.
That single, brief visual choice changes the interpretation of the entire narrative.
It really does. It completely undermines the safety of the happy ending. Who is to say that beautiful utopian 2024 isn't just a level 3 simulation?
He can't be sure.
Someone, somewhere in an even higher dimension, just got bored and hit the power button on the TV watching Douglas Hall's life.
Yeah.
How can we ever truly prove we have reached base reality? It's turtles all the way down, forever. See you on next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Check out the video description for the letterbox list with all the movies we've covered in this series. See you next week. Cinephiles, bye-bye.